everyone, I'm Sarah Christensen with One Sage's View Astrology. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you everyone for voting, and guess Luke Newton is the winner. So we are going to be focusing on Luke Newton, and we're going to be looking at his 2025, the rest of the year, and 2026, kind of what is in store for him in the coming year with his astrology. I also will be covering some details about Venus's transit of 2026 and why that's so important for Luke Newton. I will also want to give you a little piece of homework. And my homework is this. I want you to think about Luke Newton's archetype, and that means kind of what he embodies for you, or maybe what you think he embodies for the collective who observe him. So came to fame through the Bridgerton series, right? So we have that as kind of our foundation of what kind of how we might look at it, but there's also additional images and ideas that people carry for Luke Newton in their own individual perspective, but also as a group. So there's the fan base, there's several parts of the fan base, but it's kind of like, what is the archetype that Luke Newton represents for you as an individual, but also what he might embody as an archetype for the collective, okay? And I will share mine at the end of this video, okay? But I'm curious, so put yours in the comments and don't sneak ahead and check mine out. You have to put yours in honestly, because I want to know what you think he embodies. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, what's an archetype? What am I looking for to consider? And it is the, this kind of idea, human experience that is kind of molded into a symbol, and the image of the hero, the image of the elder, the image of, the wise woman, or that kind of imagery, right? There's also the teacher or the philosopher or a child. The athlete is another one. The athlete can get close to the warrior, but they're a little bit different, right? What else? There's other ones, the beloved. So these kinds of, the lover, the beloved, that kind of detail as well is an archetype. Archetypes are very powerful. There's also like the communicator, the messenger, right? These are very important archetypes that we collectively look at. Now, a lot of the planets hold layers of these archetypal symbols. So with Mercury, you have like the one who's always in movement, making things move. He's also a trickster. Mercury is also a trickster, a psychopomp, because he has the underworld process that right now we're in a Mercury retrograde. So we have Mercury moving toward the point where he'll station direct, I believe, on Wednesday this coming week while this is being edited. So hope it all works out. So Mercury, the planet Mercury as an archetype, the communicator, and how things have movement, but he's also like a liminal figure because he can go between the worlds, right? So that's very, very important about Mercury. So these are archetypes, right? And then Venus, she embodies kind of the goddess, the beauty, and that idea for us. She also embodies like the beloved and that kind of relationship with other, right? So Aphrodite has that, but Aphrodite also has a deeper context in as you go deeper and deeper into her myth, but she's also represented in the psyche and Eros, as we discussed last year, that she becomes like the dark mother in the archetype. So hopefully these are some archetypal examples that you can kind of glean and consider for what you would give to your own identification with Luke Newton, but then also what you might put as the collective, okay? The other is Jupiter. Jupiter's like Santa Claus, he's like but Jupiter is also, the more you study Greek myth, is the one who impregnates everything. He makes everything pretty chaotic, and so he's a little bit of expansion. So the proliferation of things. But then there's Saturn, who's like, here's the boundary. You have duties, you have responsibilities. But Saturn is also like Father Time. So there's something about a bit archetype with that, right? So when we go to New Year's, the New Year's Eve, it's like, the old Father Time before the baby of the new year, right? So you see these archetypes at play. Okay, so homework is in the comments, put what you think your kind of how you relate the archetype to Luke Newton. Now, you may be challenged like I was in this process to separate Luke Newton from Colin Bridgerton, okay? And as he's done other pieces of work in the plays that he's done and coming movies, that you're going to maybe start seeing additional archetypal layers emerge out of Luke Newton, okay? And for your relationship with that, okay? So I think this is going to be fun because it's going to be an ongoing little thing that we check in on, okay? What else? Because archetypes are fascinating. So also in this video, I'm going to be covering the transits for him of 2026 and the transits of Venus, because I want to focus on Venus, which is in Greek Aphrodite. Okay, so we have Venus, Roman, and in Greek is Aphrodite. Okay, so all those layers. What else? Yeah, so that's what's going to be my focus for this particular video. And I hope you have fun. We're going to be talking about astrology. We're going to be talking about Bridgerton. We're going to be talking about Luke Newton. And that's always fun, right? And the different cycles of planets. And so there's lots of information in this video. I hope you have fun. And I recommend having a notebook because we're going to keep diving into these concepts, okay? And I think it'll be helpful to maybe make some notes on Venus or make some notes on archetypes, okay? All right, let's go. Let's have some fun and see what the charts have to tell us about Luke Newton and the end of this year, 2025, and coming into 2026. Let's go. Okay, finally got my charts up. So I just wanted to kind of take a sneak peek at January 1st, 2026 before we jump in, because I kind of give you a little bit of a foreshadowing. So Venus, I'm going to be in the second part of this video focusing on Venus. And so at the New Year's of 2026 on New Year's Day, basically right after the countdown, Venus is going to be right at the midheaven in London. So it's at 9 degrees and 50 minutes, and the midheaven is 10 degrees, 6 minutes of Capricorn. And so we're going to be kind of exploring that movement of Venus, and we're going to be paying attention to that closely for Luke Newton. So in your notebook, you might want to consider, when you're observing Luke Newton in the press and through his events of things that he is putting out in the world, his projects, Venus is going to be an interesting planet to observe for Luke Newton in 2026. So I want to start off by showing this image of just London and understanding where Venus is at the beginning of the year, okay? So I wanted just to point that out. So I'm going to start off on this beautiful image of Luke Newton. I think this was part of a campaign he did for BAFTA, that image. So here we go. So we're going to look at, just today is November 23rd when I'm recording this, just to get a sense of the planets, where they are in this particular moment. I started recording at 2:34 p.m. in my time. I'm in Bologna right now. So this gives you some idea of just planets and where they are right now and what that looks like for Luke Newton. So what I want to look at are a couple of things. So recently, Jupiter was near his moon, which is kind of expanding that sense of self that's within his unconscious mind. So that's kind of going retrograde. So it's kind of hitting off on this opposition over here with his outer planets of Uranus and Neptune. Very important in the chart for Luke Newton. This activation of opposition is super important because it brings up things of the unconscious mind, things that are not necessarily visible to him, but others would identify with parts of that, what he may experience. Okay. And then we look at, interesting at this moment when I started this, that ascendant is on my ascendant. So I did not plan that. It just kind of happened because of what was going on today. So interesting that might be something that emerges in this. And I'm not, so I kind of do these very freestyle. I do take a few notes, right? Like general things that I want to cover, but I don't script out my entire video. So this is interesting to kind of look at the moment and how we might be playing with this astrology with Luke Newton. So this is valuable. I also want to point out that right now we have this 29 degrees Neptune in Pisces, Saturn in Pisces, 25 degrees, and the Nord node still in Pisces at 14 degrees. And this is kind of the end cycle, huge ending cycle, which we're all aware of. But the way that it will play out in 2026 is that conjunction that's happening February 20th, 2026. And for Luke Newton, that happens very, very close, literally within 2 degrees of his Venus. Okay, so huge new things that I think I alluded to in videos from before when we were doing in 2024 and sharing with you, but this is where it really starts to take off. So things that have been, I would call them cooking, baking, whatever you want to call it, from within his psyche and starts to emerge even in a bigger way, right? So a lot of the work that he's done will start emerging that's been behind the scenes, and there's some other things that he has in the works. So we'll talk about that. But this is an interesting changing paradigm about like how he perceives other people's values because of that ending cycle. So there's some kind of ending there for him. Okay. And that activates it's also at this time a reminder that this Mercury retrograde is absolutely activating his Pluto. So this is the deep part of his self that is kind of in an unconscious part of the self, the deeper self, the heritage, that deep history, that deep psychic shadow that's there. So he embodies a lot of different themes that will emerge in his art. And it cannot be easy to carry some of this stuff when he's away from the stage or away from art. And so he'll have experiences where that can be amplified in terms of being a part of something like a group that's putting on a play or the series like Bridgerton. He's part of an entire cast, and then he had his being a lead of the show, co-lead with Nicola in season 3, right? So that was like an arcing moment, but he has more, and his own personal trajectory is really going to take off in 2026. So we will see that for sure. Okay. And at this moment, we also have this big planet, Pluto. And Pluto is opposing his ascendant, likely, if I still think his ascendant is in the first probably 3 or 4 degrees, 0 degrees to 3 or 4 degrees of Leo. I still think that is the case. Until we have an actual birth time, we can't confirm that. We can do a greater exploration of events and things like that to kind of hone in on that. But partner is a very significant part of that. So there is this transformation for Luke Newton with relationship and serious relationships, committed relationships, because there's a dissolving that's going on in that image because of Saturn being the ruler, co-ruler of Aquarius, and then how that within him has a dissolving image going on right now, right? Or there's been a pretty strong illusion and how he has to adjust to how it really is versus the illusion. So that is a part of the mix that people go through when they have that kind of awakening moment. So that will be interesting. Okay, let me just get rid of my arrows here. I hope you're enjoying the video. Just wanted to pop in real quick and let you know about the community for Astro Sages. It is now open and it's no cost. Yay! So it's just a fun place to gather and share commentary on archetypes of Bridgerton characters and themes, as well as some of the astrology just in terms of charts and things like that I might land on in a moment. There isn't a translator as there is inside of YouTube at this moment, but that could change. But so the bulk of the Bridgerton I do will be on YouTube. And so I just want to point that out. But if you would like to join and just have extra things that you can look at for what I do, I will have courses in there and also have access to things like doing a book club. So we'll be doing our first book club will kick off in January. We're going to do Fire, The Life Givers by Stephen Forrest. And hopefully you can join if you've not read that book or if you want to analyze that book more deeply, then please join. It'll be fun to have you in the circle and understand all that we can gather from that book and the insights from Stephen Forrest's writings and expand on what we know about all of the fire element signs like Aries and Leo and Sagittarius. It's really helpful to know and have a deep understanding of the elements. So I plan to go through each of those books of the elements in 2026. I think it's a great primer to have and a foundation to have for a beginning astrology student. And hopefully you will join us. So Thank you so much, and back to the video. All right, so moving on, I want to look at the next chart. So let's look at this chart. Okay, so we're going to go back a little bit. We're going to look at 2025 a little bit just to kind of capture some things. In February 23rd, they had the SAG Awards where they all came to LA. And I just wanted to have a sneak peek at this. I gave the time about 6. It could have been a little bit later, but generally that's about the time that they start hitting the red carpets around 5 or 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock maybe. But if you have a more accurate time for that SAG Awards and the red carpet detail, please share. I don't mind that, correcting it. That just would adjust the ascendant for me. More importantly here, I want to talk about some of the bigger things that I see. So we have the moment of the SAG Awards. There's the sun hitting inside his 8th house, which he's in after his birthday in the beginning of 2025. He's age 32 right now, right? So his entire year is focused on that 8th house, the value of other people's money, but it's kind of being exiled a little bit. He may exile himself as well. That's kind of his water, extra water tends to seek that place of isolation, but he also may feel a little bit exiled in some ways too. So that can be something that we may perceive or we may not perceive. It depends on what's going on for him emotionally. And so there may be some things that he will churn on that, right? There was a lot of press and stuff around his interaction with Nicola during the SAG Awards, of course. And I'm curious what you think about that as well as reflecting back, right? So another thing is, just as a reminder, here's the Saturn and the Neptune. It's kind of the finishing cycle of these. This is kind of holds that illusion, like holding of the illusion, but as those two outer planets come towards the first degree, the 0 degrees Aries, where they're going to make a conjunction in February, that illusion is still there. So it's definitely in a mode of trend, that veil will fall, right? So whatever's been behind that veil comes down. So what else I want to point out? Also at this time in the SAG Awards, we had Uranus in Taurus, and that was the energy of the real hype around that. Uranus in Taurus was part of that hype around Bridgerton season 3. And I covered that in all my Bridgerton series before, discussing their world tour and all the things that went down in that time. But this event, SAG Awards, also still holds some of that energy and vibration for many people, and then how that would activate the psyche of Mr. Luke Newton. So also, he's right before that getting a Mars return, right before the SAG Awards, right? Because the Mars was in retrograde at 17 degrees of Cancer, which means that it already passed over his Mars earlier, but it was a similar Mars to his natal Mars. So he might have felt pretty comfortable in his own skin at that time. And we observed that, right? And another thing from the SAG Awards is Venus was also in the same sign as his natal Venus. So again, that masculine, feminine energy within what he would embody is going to, spill over, and we'll see that. And we did, right? So I think that's fascinating to see that. And also, this is kind of interesting as well, as Pallas Athena, which was a very interesting asteroid during all of the previous videos that I did and focused, and especially I think related to Nicola. And look at here at that moment of the SAG Awards, how Pluto in Aquarius has Pallas Athena conjunct 2 degrees. Fascinating, right? This is so interesting to me. Also, as Venus is in that January 1st chart, look at that moon at the SAG Awards, 9 degrees of Capricorn. So all that frenzied energy that was happening at the SAG Awards will also translate over again in the beginning of the year with Venus being at 9 degrees and the top of the chart. So not necessarily his chart, but that's the new year, and all the anticipation in London will be around the Bridgerton in a big way. So I have a sense that there will be, I have wondered about the press. I don't know about you. I have wondered about the press and the tour or any kind of marketing for the show for season 4 seems so much more subdued and subtle. Now, they may be holding off not to drag it out and just kind of do it a big punch of marketing and press and that kind of thing come January. So they may be waiting for that. They might do it over the holidays, but there's hardly been any for season 4. I don't know about you, but I've noticed that. I kind of wonder if the season 3 tour, because it was so extraordinary in terms of what they did and what appeared for us, that this one is a completely different paradigm shift in that. And maybe it's a little bit for us to prepare for that change up, okay? Because it is a big change up. Anyway, what else do I want to focus on this one about the SAG Awards? Also, oh yeah, I have one more. I think I didn't cover Jupiter before. Jupiter in Gemini at the SAG Awards. So that emphasizes again that combination between the mutable sign of Gemini. And Gemini is so significant as it relates to, for me, for Nicola and Luke Newton, as what they brought to me and helped me illuminate Gemini in a huge way. I don't know if I would have ever got to the insights about archetypes without having gone through that experience in 2024 and having their experience expose me to that. Anyway, I think that the Jupiter in Gemini was kind of still active at the SAG Awards, and every little movement he made, and you cannot help but ponder the twinning thing, and that was there. It was like, again, visible. And people are like, how is it? Like, these two don't get it, like the twinning, right? But it's always at a deeper level. It's what a lot of people see, but it doesn't mean necessarily that would manifest into a actual romantic relationship, but it's kind of an interesting thing that seems to come through the screens, right? About their connection when they are together in person. And how much of that, and I still kind of wonder how much is illusion. We have Mercury in Pisces, and how much is real, right? Like, how much do we hold with the veil of illusion as it relates to them? And does that come crashing down in 2026? Or does something emerge because of all of that frenzy? And, you kind of can look at the stories of the Bridgerton as great fantasy, right? Romantic, rom-com, fantasy type of artistic, creative, project, right? And how much fun would that be to work on? But I think in terms of what we carry in the archetype is understanding what it is offering us in understanding ourselves. So it's interesting at the SAG Awards, Jupiter in Gemini with the Mercury, the ruler, in Jupiter sign. So there's kind of this interplay between the two planets called mutual reception, if you want to put that down in your notes. But when Mercury is in Jupiter's sign, Pisces, and Jupiter is in Mercury sign, Gemini, you get this interesting communication between the planets having resonance. And if you pull in the traditional astrology, these are two signs that these two planets don't do very well in on their own. So when they move out of those signs, they actually have a little bit more, I guess they're not as scattered. They're not as confusing, or misdirection for Mercury and Pisces. But there's a purpose for these. And that's why I love evolutionary astrology is there is... it's magical, mystical, however you want to call it. Maybe both. There's something to your whole chart. And I've experienced it when I traveled to Bologna. And it's about like what you might experience about yourself in relation to something else, or what you're pondering, what you're experiencing. And when you travel, you get this experience of having a completely different perspective based on how your natal chart would be in the place that you are. That's called astrocartography, basically location astrology to your own natal chart. And I've experienced it a little bit, but by living in a place far away from my home state, my home country, home city, I think it's valuable to get a perspective, because since being here, I've had more aha moments behind the scenes than gosh, probably in 10 years, because I've had so much come at me in the art just by going to all the museums and all of this, but that stimulates my unconscious mind. And being here in Bologna, my ruling planet moves from the 12th house over to the 7th. So there's this almost direct interplay with self and others. So it's almost like seeing it in everything. And as you can imagine, it's really powerful. So I've got notebooks and Google documents full of information that I'll be doing in future videos, because it's like it's been turned on like a fire hose here, and I am highlighting kind of all the things I want to cover because there's so much. But anyway, back to Luke Nuke. In SAG Awards also, now if it was 6 p.m., that puts where's the ascendant? The ascendant was in Virgo, maybe. It could have been 7 o'clock. If it was 7 o'clock, it would have been in the middle of Virgo. It's because it's 2 hours to get through a sign, right? So that ascendant is likely in Virgo, and then it would be facing off with the sun, and so it's still kind of within the symbolism of the SAG Awards is still that self and other concept with ascendant and the sun on the other side, kind of like mimicking his own chart, which I think that's super fascinating just because of date, location, time, and yet it's still kind of emphasizing that self and other concept that is embedded in his chart. So, it continues to proliferate off of any time he interacts with Nicola. It gets emphasized in such a big way. So it will be fascinating to no end, for sure, to see that interaction if they do any kind of press games, when they do all the press, if they put the two together. And maybe they're going to be cautious about that because of the frenzy that it does. But I don't know if they might leverage it, right? But maybe not. I don't know. I guess. And if they do leverage that, but there will be 2 parts to it, right? Because they have a 2-part, again, first part, January 29th, January 30th, if you're in London, about 3 a.m. in the morning, which I'll have a chart later. But the part 2 comes out after the conjunction. That part 2 is in my charts, and that part 2 comes out after the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in Aries, and after Luke Newton's birthday. Okay, so that is so important because there's going to be a part 1 idea about what we might have in the archetype with Luke Newton, and then we also have part 2, which will then have an emphasis of kind of maybe some frenzy or the veil coming down as it pertains to Luke Newton, or some kind of aha moment around something related to that, right? So that's going to be super interesting, I think, for everyone who's been watching and observing him and very keen on, what is he, what's going on with him, right? There's so much fascination with him, me included. Is there anything else I want to cover on the SAG Awards? I think it kind of covers it. It's kind of going to go back in time, have a little bit of reflection before we go jump forward, right? Well, I needed to redo the chart for Luke Newton and the starting time of Bridgerton season 4. I had miscalculated London in its time when I first did the charts. So I'm redoing it. So here we are. When you make a mistake, you got to come back and do it. I had recorded the whole video for Luke Newton during the time that Mercury was retrograde, but now it's direct and I found my error. Anyway, so here we are. And we're going to look at season 4, the transits to Luke Newton's chart, and look at what that symbolism is and kind of get a feel for what might be the energy he's experiencing around that. So it's kind of looking at it through the lens of Luke Newton, and also looking at the, kind of what the energy and how it shifted from season 3 to season 4, which it has. And he's not in the lead, so he's more of the cast, but he has a strong part because he's next to one of the main characters, as well as the main character of the Bridgerton family. But it'll be interesting to see how they develop the storyline and the story arc for Penelope and as Mrs. Bridgerton, and how it changes the dynamics of his character being in that husband role and father role. So it's going to be a fascinating kind of just looking at see where they really take the story, because they did switch the book timing, because I think the books are also 3 and 4, and so now they kind of swap those for season 3, so it's really kind of changing the dynamics of time in any chronological order of any sort in the book, from the book series. So this will be interesting to explore. Anyway, on with it. So season 1 and season 2 had just one release of the show, but since season 3 they're doing this double release schedule, so they can probably get more views out of it, right? So it's a process of understanding kind of what the first part will get and what the second part will get. And what's fascinating about the timing of this particular release is that in the first part, release 1 for season 4, Luke Newton's chart is from the point of being 32 years old. So he's in a 9th house annual profection right now. But when he turns 33 on his birthday, everything shifts to his 10th house, which is career, professional, reputation, and so forth. So it goes from paying attention to Mars, which is very much in his 12th house in Cancer. So it has a lot of emotional ties to it and that. But it seems like when it shifts after his birthday, so the part 2 will have a much stronger emphasis on Luke Newton. And I'm curious of how that will shift. I don't know if it's by how he is in his personal life and how he shows up on the red carpet, and maybe in other things that he might be doing at the same time of the release of part 2, but it kind of kicks off like that. But I think as the year progresses, we're going to see a lot going on. And as a part of this video, I did do an extensive look at his Venus, but let's focus in on part 1 of that release for season 4. And in it, a couple things that I look at is where's the ascendant from the release, because we have a release time, and in where he'll be probably will be in London. If he is in another location because of helping do promo for the show, he could be in New York because he is often in New York. I am making the assumption that he'll be in London. So London, 8 a.m. This is what it looks like. Again, if he's in New York, it would be a different time slot. It would be 3 a.m. in New York because it'll be midnight in Los Angeles. So it gets tricky calculating all these times. What changes on that is how the chart switches the ascendant, I think, and slightly the midheaven. So in this particular chart, we can see the midheaven will be at 10 degrees of Sagittarius, and that's in his 5th house of creativity. But really, the ascendant tells me that he kind of blends into the cast, and it'll be a strong view of his participation here within the cast concept. So it'll be interesting to see how he blends in and what how he stands out. But it's really like the excitement will be about the interplay between his character Colin Bridgerton and his counterpart, co-star, which will be Nicola, and how that whole mirroring and what did the writers put in, and how much screen time do they really get in that part 1, right? So I'm sure there'll be a lot when they're in the mix for the masquerade ball, and there'll be a lot going on with that energy, but it's seeing them together. Or will that masquerade ball focus more on Nicola with the queen or something like that? It seems in some of the preview that we've seen so far that we definitely have seen that just in a snip from the clips that have come out. But will they focus any connection between Nicola's part of Mrs. Bridgerton, Penelope, and Colin in the masquerade ball together? I think it's highly probable that will be so limited, because they'll put most of the focus on Benedict and Sophie. I think it's Sophie and those characters. So again, I think there's going to be an interesting mix of how people look at the whole cast ensemble within those group because of all the Aquarian energy and what is coming out. So that's kind of his participation with that group energy, right? And what mirrors in what we see on any red carpet that they have, which is always fascinating, because that's when they're off, they're still kind of on the stage from the standpoint of, being what I call the performance for the red carpet stuff. They're doing the part of the job that still requires requires some kind of performance. So I think that's going to be interesting to see how they interact, or what may peer through from their connection, and how close they might be in some of that press work that always comes out during Bridgerton releases, right? But it seems very different right now because of how much press has not come out, compared to the last one. So that's interesting. Also, at the part 1, we see that Neptune has emerged into Aries, but Saturn is still in Pisces, and that gives a lot of imagination still. Boundaries will definitely be blurred because Saturn is still in Pisces. And so I think it's important to kind of, let's take these two apart. The Neptune is kind of something new is definitely happening in the imagination of it, and that's the something brand new. And with this particular season, there's going to be a huge shift in the story arc, and a huge shift in how much attention was accumulated in season 3, right? So there's going to be this interesting contrast between season 3 and season 4. And of course, we have a beautiful moon in Gemini to give us that this and that kind of contrast. So, but it's on the south node for Luke, and from his own personal experience with something in that first part release. And maybe he gets to register that in his own consciousness about, like, this is hugely different than his personal experience during season 3, right? He gets to play a side, less out front character, and that might be more comfortable for him too, right? In the red carpet, he's already brought out Antonia before in recent, I don't know what it was for, but maybe it was for some event, but she's been on the red carpet with him since then. So this will be a very different dynamic, because he may have her at his side as a part of that, unless there's something in the contract to not have that. I don't know if that would be the case, but I guess we'll find out, right? So those, when they enter on, and they sometimes come in with people that are their partners or whatnot, if they're not the main character, right? And I think that's a big thing. And that could change the dynamic and how people perceive. But again, I think it's more the cast ensemble, and there's that focus on the cast ensemble because of all that Aquarian energy. But something's definitely standing out as in the theme overall, with all that Aquarian energy here, that is square the Uranus too. Now, not at the end, but it's definitely, the Uranus is squaring off on Luke's own personal Mercury, because that's a square, and that energy can be difficult. So, like, things can slip. So there can be a slip up in what he might perceive, or there can be a slip up between him and another person that is then visible. How that occurs, what that might be, we will see, right? So it's definitely something that he can reflect upon. And who knows if it comes out as something that happens between him and Nicola, and the part that they play, and then how that is talked about, or, how that might get mirrored in some way. But it's also, if he brings out Antonia, his actual girlfriend, she starts taking on that 7th house energy, more visible in the public, and can be the one that's, that has that experience, right? So how she might be received, how there can be mix-ups and things like that, and perceptions, right? Like fixed energy is getting a disruption from the Uranus in Taurus still. Now, the Uranus in Taurus still gives us the energy of what was occurring for season 3. So all that excitement and the beauty, the costume, and all of that is going to be a part of the mix. But it will be a blend, because you have the Uranus in Taurus is that it's kind of focused on, it kind of like unexpected things can happen. Now that could be what's good in the storyline, because there can be some really great twists and turns that we don't anticipate, and wonder how they might build that story arc to continue the storyline now that we have the reveal of Lady Whistledown, right? So that'll be interesting to see where they take it. The other thing that I kind of wonder about is this Neptune over Luke's Venus, and I do an extensive part on the Venus. But at the release of part 1 of season 4, I kind of wonder if there's kind of some as I describe later about Neptune in Aries kind of makes me think of a purification of something that's in the raw energy of something. So it is that initiating something within his own way he feels the beauty part, or how it's expressed, or what people think in terms of how they feel connected and have that adoration, because that's a part of the Venuses too, is what is magnetized towards you. But this is kind of like a purifying energy, kind of, or a penetrating at the same time, kind of both. So I kind of wonder how that influences the Venus in some way. And I think it can be fairly sudden, but there are other elements that are being activated at the same time. I mean, that Neptune is in a sextile to the Pluto and the Mars in the chart of that release of part 1. And that can really excite a lot of energy around what's going on with the cast, what's going on with the other person, which we can translate that is what's going on with Nicola and what's showing up for Nicola, and what kind of transformation is going on for her. If we map that as a projection onto the character that she plays, people will probably try to translate on that as Nicola herself versus the character of Penelope Bridgerton and Lady Whistledown as one and known. So there's this kind of dynamic that's going on, but Mars in the mix of being still in a sextile and possibly to his midheaven. I mean, that's a guesstimate for the midheaven within an hour time frame, right? I'm still pretty positive about his rising sign as Leo, and it being within the first couple of degrees, maybe 0 to 4 degrees, I think is where his ascendant is. Going to be interesting to see how those two really strong planets, there's a strong transformation going on in that as it pertains to the Venus. There's so many things tied to that Venus in his chart, and the perception around the beauty part, the perception around his reputation, all of these things. So this is really a hinge kind of moment. And what I mean by that is kind of like how people pick up on it, I think it's going to be like what the expectation is in the audience, the fans' mind about what they expect, and how that, because there was a lot of people looking at season 3, there was a lot of disappointment, what they expected, what they got, but then they pushed it in the charts of, how many times it was viewed up the charts, right? So did that translate? I mean, it's kind of interesting. And I think some of that was the obsession with these two because of the world tour that they did. But I kind of wonder how that gets translated and maybe reframed in some way for how they go about it. So in terms of what is given to them in the script and the costumes and what setups that they get to have as the last season, as a couple together, since they are carrying forward and still participating. But how many episodes are they really in? Is it only that first episode? Because we only get 4 or something? I can't remember how many total are in the season, but I think it's like 4 or 5. And in terms of the part 1, and then they repeat that in part 2. So I think it's like 4 and 4, but if it's 5, I'll have to double check on that. But yeah, I think that'll be interesting to see. He also has the opposition with the Jupiter in Cancer in his 12th house, which is the behind the scenes with the family, the cozy. That's definitely going to be there. But it's going to be interesting also to see how that is in an opposition to his Uranus and Neptune in the Capricorn, as something kind of being reframed in a huge way, because that's Jupiter opposite those two outer planets. So there's definitely part of the mix here. And so I will probably at some point in late January, actually it'll be early February, that I'll probably do an analysis on how that first part was looking after watching it, because I like to see how is that energy that we have from the release moment playing out. And it's kind of a mix, because we get it from the fans, we get it from seeing the overall trend of what people are saying, and we see it from what people are also talking about in the mix regarding his connection with Nicola, because there is a lot going on in the fandom in terms of what people appreciate, adore, and lock in on related to Luke Newton himself as an actor and Nicola Coughlan as an actress, and what they bring together. And it's going to be interesting to see how it kind of levels up from that perspective, right? So there's a lot going on with that. I also see that the ascendant has Mercury also connected in the launch. So that has because they're in a stellium, they're so closely tied together, and it's very close to his sun as well, because 13, 14, 14, that's the ascendant of the moment, plus his sun is there, and not, or the sun of the moment, Vesta of the moment. So these are all creating a stellium, and his sun is at 16 degrees. And so then, because Saturn is kind of pulling that all together. So there's a lot of energy, but it's the Aquarian energy of the context of the group, but the individuals in the group. There is something about the importance of the individual being framed within the whole thing to work well. So that'll be great to see how they work that out during that first part, right? And then how do they bridge to some tension and excitement in that first part? And this is a classic. I still have to go do the research on the old Cinderella classic actual first fairy tale. I'd have to go back and look at that because they do get rewritten a lot. And this is, of course, another thematic archetypal representation of that, but it's done in a more contemporary, overlaid into the Bridgerton time frame, right? So they make it modern, but in that time frame. And I'm curious to see what music that they use, because that's always fun to see what they use in the music as well. And I know that it might be more modern, like because of the Aquarian Venus for the music, but we'll see. Because Venus will, in the next one, move into Pisces, and I think that does make an influence on people's appreciation for the music in the part 2. So we'll see. I don't know. Okay, so I think I've covered most what I wanted to cover on this one, but it will be a fascinating thing to explore as a reflection point in early February when I'm in Dublin to look at what how that actually did play out. It's fun to kind of set the stage, see what they are framed in the astrology, and then see how that actually plays out. So let's go to part 2 release and see what that looks like. So when I was typing out the date, I know in Europe they type the day first, then the month, and then the year. So when you do that for February 26, look at that date, how it's written. It looks like a mirror, 2602, and then 2026, right? So it's kind of fascinating that it looks like that. I kind of, it's kind of like the two, if you flip this view, these two, that would be a mirror, but I guess this one doesn't, but it's pretty close, right? I've had that happen in dates before, so it's kind of caught my eye. But I wanted to see how does the energy shift from the second release, which is on February 26th, and see how does that influence the archetypal changes and changing dynamics. Plus, he's had his birthday, so now Venus is paramount and important for him. And we'll see in his I think it's in his progression that Venus is at, I believe it's the Venus, the Venus is at 19 degrees or 18 degrees of Pisces. So I should take a look at that. Actually, it might be in Aries. I need to double check that. I know that 18, 19 degrees of Pisces is important in Nicola's chart. I think that's where her Jupiter is. So there's something to that. And it's important to look at what planets in the transits activate something in the chart, but also something that activates the progressions. And the progressions, I'll have to pull another chart to do that, but we'll do that before for sure. So Venus does change. She's sitting in 19 degrees of Pisces. That adds some kind of emotional flair with the connection to Jupiter because of the trine, and that mix throws a lot of water intensity into what is flowing from the release of part 2. And so it's also, Pisces can be looked at as highly romantic. And so to me, the imagination and the romantic part takes it up a notch. And also the North Node, the Sun also being in Pisces at 9 degrees, 7 degrees. But I think that's the overall context. I think that when we look at Luke Thompson's chart for being the main character in the season 4, that's where it's going to play out, right? Like the bulk of that But I think because of the intense interest in Luke Newton and Nicola from last season will carry over, and these will activate those points again for what was happening last season. So I know there are points, and maybe I'll make some clips that I made discussing that point of 19-18 degrees of Pisces, because they were pretty important points. And there's also the point as it connects to Luke and Antonia, not just Luke and Nicola. So there's a connection between all three. So it kind of makes me wonder what goes on the red carpets for the part 2. Right? So wherever they will be. This one, I took a chart for London, but they could just as easily be in New York for the part 2. That's a possibility. And because they tend to go 2 places, so it could be that they go part 1 in New York and then part 2 in London to close it out. So I guess we'll see. And if they change the location, I will look at that and explore that. What else? The moon and part 2 is in Cancer. And so this right here, this part of his chart, there's a lot that might be felt as the connection by people, by fans, and they're looking at the domestic part that Colin's character plays. So him as Colin Bridgerton and being a father, that's a big part of this kind of reframing of his character. So that reframing, but also looking for the romantic part, because that's so tied to what they were building in that season 3 and, friends to lovers concept and literally being transferred onto those 2 during the world tour. So there will be this carryover, but then there might be an idealization from fans about what they might want out of those characters for their own desires projected onto them. That's a possibility here, right? So with the moon in Cancer, it's very emotional, but kind of behind the scenes, a little bit more isolated. So it could be that he pulls back because of maybe what was discussed from part 1. And there's some kind of connection here to his Juno. And Juno, as anyone knows, is the asteroid that is about serious partners, serious relationships, and the partner. And there's a lot of themes that you can go into on Juno, and I can do that later. But it's an asteroid. I think it's more important that I look at the bulk of the planets that are, the Sun, Mercury, Venus, all the way out to Pluto. Those are the bulk of what I like to put the bulk of my attention on. But, asteroids are powerful when something like the moon touches it during a transit. And this is a big event, right? So that'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. So that's him being domestic, being with the wife, so there's such an interesting effect between Colin Bridgerton's character and how Luke Newton embodies that even while he's on the red carpet. So I don't know who is Luke Newton behind the scenes. We got a lot of interesting perspectives because of the leaked videos of 22, 23, 24, whatever. But I don't know. We don't know how he has changed things in his personal life. That he's pretty private about that. He pretty much tries to put most of what's out there as his professional life. And that's fine, to each their own. But it's going to be interesting kind of what does manage to come through, right? In that personal sense through him visiting with fans in some way. Sometimes I know that when he did the recent McQueen detail in New York, he would come behind the scenes and meet up with fans. And so there was a lot of interaction with that too. Another thing about that moon is it is also square to the now conjunction of the Neptune and the Saturn, this is the biggest planetary thing in 2026. So we're going to be all realizing how big of a change that is on global stuff. But from an artistic standpoint, this part 2 will embody some of that new identity, that new chapter, something very raw. Something is being purified in some way, and the structure is in that dynamic. So I like that, how I've kind of landed on that intensification of the fire energy in Aries, and how that with the Neptune, it's kind of like a purification of what's going on in how we think about that theme. So that's all in the mix, right? What else? I really think this accentuation for him, this is for Luke Newton himself, is the Jupiter in Libra. So the way he expands through his sibling and through communication, perception, and thoughts, and these things that are picked up from the feminine, and how that plays as a dynamic for Luke Newton. It's at an interesting position. It's opposite the ascendant. The ascendant's at 14 degrees at that part too. So there's that interesting dynamic going on. And the Mars at the same time is right on his Mercury, but for the partner. So this is like how the partner may communicate or speak, how they are in the frame of things. Now, some people will look at that from the perspective that he's been with Antonia for at least, a year and a half, maybe 2. I can't even remember when he actually first started. I think it was summer of 2023. So she was kind of tagging along behind the scenes in 2024. And then, now here we are in 2025 going into 2026. So she's definitely a long-term partner that's in the picture in some capacity. So that's, to me, that's Saturn. So there's some kind of change up that's really a real different dynamic that's going on for her. If she's somehow out front more, there's a lot of change up that goes with that. How does that impact the show? How does that impact views and these kind of things? Do people switch in terms of their adoration for maybe more into Luke Thompson and Yaren for their work? It's going to be interesting to see how that does shift. I think there's still enough going on with the Venus in 1819 Pisces because of how that hits in his chart, how that hits in Nicola's chart as well, which I'll do a video on Nicola soon. But it's really interesting to see how all those things come together in his chart and actually have a great tension in cardinal signs. And when you have that cross like that, he has 2 planets here. There are 3 planets: the Jupiter in Libra, the Neptune and Uranus. Those are his own personal planets. They are receiving the tension of the moment of the release, and the transiting Jupiter creates this dynamic to his own chart. So it's kind of like the square that activates his perception, his communication. Something's going on in his reputation, because that's the Venus get receiving all of that energy, and that is his ruling planet of the 10th house, right? And then it's also how things can, the changing dynamic, the breakdown of something about the work, because this is how he might serve his art to the public, right? That to me is the 6th house, but it's also it's a tricky house because it can be where incidents happen and this kind of thing, and the ruler is Saturn. So that can be that transiting Saturn has difficulty a little bit because of the intensity of Neptune, and it's on his Venus. So I'm really curious about what actually might come out in all the extras that they do, because that's where you see a little bit more of Luke Newton and things that happen in his face and his expressions, right? And what that may look like, because if their connection, let's talk about Nicola and Luke and their connection. If their connection still harbors something underneath for him in his psyche, that could still spill over, even if he's in a relationship. Because if there was something that wasn't resolved before the new relationship, then that will have some kind of reveal. How is that revealed? And then is that frustrating for him? I don't know. We'll see. It could be that because of all of the energy shifting in terms of that purification onto the Venus, it could be that something is coming through that's so powerful, it's kind of purifying that, and people will start shifting from that. So I think I talked about that when I was doing the series last year, talking about the eventual combination of Saturn and Neptune on that Venus, because that is really a changing dynamic for him. there's no way that he's not going to come out of that with some kind of different reputation. But there's multiple things going on in the career in 2026. So it's not just Bridgerton, but Bridgerton is where he rose to fame to get other parts. But he has multiple projects coming out in 2026. So, and I kind of am curious what he will get in other projects that he will be doing that will totally change his dynamic for his, his work in the coming years. And that would be something that emerges in 2027, 28. And like I said, I think there's going to be a paradigm shift. I think it was 2028 because of his stationing progressed Venus. And that will be a huge dynamic. And I guess we'll find out, right? He has choices to make by, what he pursues and what his interests and passions are, and then what he does in his personal life and how visible that will be. We'll see. Remember, he has the moon in Cancer is in the 12th house. That will be private. It will be hard to get more out of him from that perspective because he will always have that moon behind the ascendant. So it's a little bit more, he will go private. When you're younger, you don't realize how, as he rose into fame, he didn't realize how being so public could be really tricky to navigate as well. So I think I covered everything on this chart. The midheaven, I didn't cover the midheaven. The midheaven is touching in to Capricorn and does square off with that also. So I think there'll be something that is, I know that there will be conversations from people who blog or do videos about Bridgerton, and there will be some changing paradigm that's really significant here because of however they have written this season, because that midheaven, so the whole kind of theme of the whole thing, it lands in Luke's 6th house. So there will be kind of that dynamic. So there will be a lot of big changes that people can't even predict because that has that Neptune square that, right? So there's Neptune, Saturn square the midheaven. So there's some really, really big changes that I don't think people could even anticipate possibly in some of the scripts. And how that lands for Luke Newton is that changing paradigm because it's so focused on his Venus. You know what I noticed, and I don't know if anybody else has noticed, when I went to his is it IMDb? It shows only one episode so far. And so I don't know if there is additional episodes that, Colin Bridgerton will be in season 4. Because don't they list out all of the episodes that an actor is in for a particular season? So I think that would be interesting because if that's of course, the co-star, his co-star, it's Luke Thompson's, he's the co-lead, right, with Yaron Ha. So the focus will be on them. So if there's only the Masquerade Ball, so there's a lot going on with that. I think there will be so many expectations on Luke's character, but I don't think they're going to fully get their cup filled up, So there will be something that people need to check in on that. And then, and then the focus will shift. I know that Luke Thompson, he's one of my favorite characters from the first part, but Luke Newton definitely grew on me from how he changed up the character and how he did such a big transformation and just how he played off with Nicola. That was a huge thing. But I also think part of it was the energies of the moment and how it hit my own chart, right? Because I look at it from a reflective standpoint. Maybe other people are starting to, but it's how the art impacts you and what it pulls and draws from you and gets you excited about something, and you might have a new passion or whatnot. So, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's like the fantasy and the desire to have the fantasy played out, right? So, but there's something to that too in your astrology. So, as a reflection point. So anyway, so that's going to be really interesting to see all that. Yeah, I think he's more behind the scenes than people are probably. I think they want him more up front, but that's not going to be the case. I think he plays a part though in the season, potentially that's season 5, because of how that relationship is with, but I don't know, Luke Thompson's character is often close with the Louise character. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that works out. I don't know how far off they go with the books, right? So, because I believe that Luke's character, Colin Bridgerton, in the books was pretty connected into that 5th book with Louisa's story. Am I saying that right? I haven't watched that one in a while. In terms of, I have read that book last year, so I'm not recalling everything in that particular book. Anyway, I hope that part has been helpful in understanding, part 2 of season 4 and kind of how that does lay out in turn into Luke Newton's chart. So hopefully that's been helpful. And, what are your thoughts about what you think might be forthcoming in season 4 as it pertains to Luke and his Luke Newton and his participation? What do you think might be received by the fans? What do you think the fan reaction might be? I'm curious what you think. Hopefully some of this astrology is helping you pick up on some things and how there can be dynamics that speak to what actually may play out. But it's such a big volume of energy from the fans that it's important to kind of keep that in mind because there's so much dynamic. But having that first part 1 having so much Aquarian energy, it's really the cast ensemble, huge cast ensemble. As they start this story, it'll be probably that masquerade ball, or there might be some setup to understand who these emerging characters are as well, from Uranus and the characters that are connected to her backstory to participate in that. But it may be that they come to the end of that episode 1 for the masquerade, and episode 2, 3 maybe being the mask. I don't know when it lands. It seems that preparatory part for the masquerade ball is absolutely in episode 1. So we'll find out, right? It's fun. I know a lot of people love this and these characters a lot. And I think I already covered in the other part of that. Oh, before we go into Venus, I want to talk about his solar return. Now, again, I don't have Luke Newton's birth chart, exact time of birth. We have the knowing that he has an Aquarius rising from those videos from before. And so we have an approximation. So the thing that would change by a slight change up of his solar return will be related to that basic, the ascendant, okay? And maybe a little bit on the midheaven, but we have a general sense. So it could be within a 2-hour block of that, right? So it could be deeper into Leo, or that ascendant could be, but because it's a 10th house annual profection, I really think that his next year will be amplified with the ascendant in Aries. With the ascendant in Leo. And there's a lot for that because it emphasizes the whole mirroring effect that comes with Luke Newton in the world. So his sun at 16 degrees, and again, remember the minutes are going to be slightly off because I don't have an exact birth time, but in his coming year of being 33 years old, he's going to have a stellium, all these planets in Aquarius. So the mirror of the other is super amplified. And we have Saturn still in Pisces of his solar return. So that means that there might be over the whole year, he will still have a bit of the old paradigm getting played out by the other. So it will take through the year maybe for it to fully materialize an awareness of that other with all of that weight of all that Aquarius energy. It can be, what that means to me is that he might not get it until the later, because it takes time for him to pick up on things. And because he has his Mercury is in Aquarius, Saturn in Aquarius, Sun in Aquarius. So it takes time to pick up and from the translation from the other person, from the feedback from the others, to then materialize what does that mean in the consciousness for what how he identifies himself in relation to the other people. So it can take all year for him to get that, but that Saturn in Pisces tells me there's a little bit of the hole in the drop, it's like the drop in the hole of the ocean, and what's that facilitating in the structure of his mind. But that Saturn moves into Aries forevermore, going forward and not going back into Pisces after February 20th. So he may have some ending notes that come in January and part of February, but by end of February, full on into getting the whole, the burn of all that fire energy onto his fire Venus. a Venus in Aries is not a magnet. She's not like the magnet. This in that concept, it's more like she's more Martian. She's more like a Pallas Athena, and the feminine in the warrior concept. So it's a go get it. But also when you go get something without having done some work, you can go get the wrong thing sometimes because you acted so quickly. But there's a purification going on here. So through the purification, how long does it take for the purification to really set in and start showing itself? Well, I wrote down some dates that I think are important to keep in mind as it relates to this Venus, right? So we're going to focus on, so this is his solar return. Venus is at 24 degrees, about to go into Pisces. She'll be in Pisces at the second release, part 2, or the series 4 part 2 release. That is going to be February 26th. So just a few days, like, a couple weeks, right? His birthday, and then a couple weeks later, Venus is going into Pisces. So I wrote down, like, in 2026, Venus starts off the year in Capricorn at 9 degrees and emerges into Aquarius January 17th. So when it's in Capricorn, it's here in the 6th house. So there's maybe a lot of responsibility working that's taking place in service to something that's collective. So that's when the press will happen, and we're going to be seeing some things, but there will be more of the cast perspective versus just going individual focus. So people will pull it out. But Venus in Aquarius also is kind of doing it in a way that is more equal. It has an equilibrium, is an equal partner, that kind of thing. And that is part of his own personal solar return, all of that stellium, right? So the cast, being a part of a cast, these are big themes. And what is coming out of his mirroring with those co-leads throughout the year. But January 17th, Venus is in Aquarius. And so this gets amplified. And as it builds toward the season 4 part 1 release, January 29th, 30th in London. And so that's really emphasized for him, and being part of a group, being a part of that. His career taking off, being part of a group. Again, that emphasized the archetype of the group. And then by February 10th, Venus is moved into Pisces, so it goes into his 8th house and emphasizes other relationship components of the value of others. So there'll be maybe the amplification of appreciation for that thing he's so in his public life. That's what we'll be seeing, is that public component of it. How much will be visible of the actual partner, Antonia, in this case? Or do we start seeing something else emerging because Neptune is moving to Aries and Saturn still is, and then it will emerge. So big month. February is huge. So by February 26th, they release part 2, right? So we have kind of 2 perspective here. January 29th and 30th, Venus in an air sign amplifies the air signs, amplifies his Jupiter, amplifies mirroring, and that whole expansive, and amplifies his south node. Yeah, look, there's a south node. What is Mr. Luke Newton learning about the group and how he puts out a message as it relates to the other, right? The mirroring. And so there's layers to it, because there becomes this like blur that while the Saturn is in Pisces, or even Neptune, where it was confusing where those boundaries were. They might be more defined now as that merges in, but there was a purpose for having them be blended. On March 6th, Venus will then be up in the 9th house for Luke Newton, and will be moving towards his Venus within a day or two of that. So March is a huge month for the amplification of the Venus, because he's coming to his Venus return. And a Venus return is a good video I can do in the future, because it'll teach you about cycles within cycles. So every planet will have like a relationship, especially those faster moving planets, we experience it every month because we have the sun going to different signs, but it's really the moon going around and giving us the month and moves through all the signs. But your Mercury will go through a period of so many days, it will transit through the whole zodiac. Venus. And so when you have your Venus return, you have a new period of time, a new chapter of Venusian themes and how they're going to be amplified in your life. And for Luke Newton, it is huge in 2026. So huge that I think it's one of the biggest years yet for Luke Newton because of what is amplified in his 7th house of other, Venus going into having a return, in having the Saturn and Neptune literally right on that conjunction, right on his Venus. So his own Venus is going through purification. She gets baptized. She gets baptized by the fire, right? So, and if we want to amplify that in the group, I can later in the community. But that's huge in our understanding of consciousness. And maybe this puts you into a self-reflective place of, well, what about my own chart? Where's Neptune and where's Saturn in Aries purify? What are they purifying for me? For me, Sarah, that early degrees of Aries is where my Chiron is. So I get to understand something brand new, and it's getting purified about my understanding of the Chiron principle in the chart, which is the wounded healer. So what is that whole journey of wounded healer and how it gets purified? Which is interesting because I think that is really all of the stuff that's materialized for me in new awareness and understanding myth, legends, and story, and all of these as a part of that process. We have to move through those personal stories, right? And how we go through the whole purification process, which can be extended out over time depending, right? So on certain transits and cycles and things like that. Quite comprehensive. Okay, so continue on with Venus throughout the year. If I go back, so that was March 6th for when Venus moves into Aries. And so that was really important because it gives him the Venus return, like a day or two right in there. I think probably be March 7th, March 8th would be probably a very important day for Luke Newton because the Venus will be returned. So I will probably do a video on his Venus return sometime in February, if not sooner. March 30th, Venus moves into Taurus. And when Venus moves into Taurus, that will be in his 10th house of career. Okay. So March 30th, this is huge, huge, huge. This whole month will amplify his relationship with the feminine, his career, his persona. I think fashion will be out front again and how he works with that. Because usually when he is out in the public eye, there's a lot of context as it relates to fashion and beauty, and that relationship with the beauty as a feminine concept, but then it's over within the context of him playing it as a heterosexual male in our society and our culture. Then we have, that's March 30th. So from March 30th to April 24th, we have that Venus in Taurus. And interesting, how synchronistic is this? On April 24th, Venus moves into Gemini. April 24th, Venus moves into Gemini. And April 25th, Uranus moves into Gemini. So now we have a Venus conjunction with Uranus, and they are sextile to this block of energy here. It's amplifying the duality. It's amplifying 1, 2, and it is amplifying like this and that. There's high comparison of this and that duality on the spectrum, but it's also divine twin, because if you understand Gemini as a sign, you understand, maybe having read up on the story of Castor, or the myth of Castor and Pollux, birthed from Leda, and that whole storyline, and the divine twin and the mortal twin. So this is going to pull in some of that, and we can do some more exploration on that. That's a whole nother big series of videos related to the mortal twin and the divine twin, and that storyline, that myth, and what plays out with Luke Newton, others, and within this context, now he's moving through a purification of the Venus, and when that happens, I think the current relationship will go through a massive change come April, and that's because her Jupiter in Gemini is also having that kind of experience where Venus is there and the Uranus is re-entering and making that hiccup. Now, is the projection that Luke Newton puts onto Antonia having some kind of splitting mechanism, like happening that is actualized in their relationship because of, his psyche and how he projects onto that relationship? Or is that played out through the art and we really don't get to bear witness of what's really happening in his personal life? I think with the media attention and the fold out of many things happening in his career in 2026, his reputation, these kinds of things, there are numerous projections that have happened related to Luke Newton and Antonia. Okay, that will all come into a whole new era because it has to, based on his chart. Okay, because his own psyche is going through a purification as it relates to the Venus, the Aphrodite principle. Okay, so something else happens related to how it's perceived, his career. So it has a dynamic shift with his career. He may choose new projects. I know that there are some emerging, the psychological thriller, the animation with and the voice relation, because he has such a beautiful voice, right? So the Venus is a part of that. The Taurus is a part of that. So maybe there's more of that. Maybe there's more work related to being on the stage. And he might like the stage because it's different than being amplified from the context of some film or, what he's had to navigate, right? I mean, some actors may like, oh, I'm going back to the stage because of how they experience. It's not recorded. It's the one-time thing. I don't know. I really don't know if they don't. I don't think they record, but maybe they do. No, I think most plays are just you go to the stage, you go to see the performance, and then you're captured in the moment, right? Versus the film aspect. But having been on film is such a different kind of experience. What else? So April is huge. So April 24th, 25th, that whole time, that week before, but really right on 25th, that's going to be super dynamic. And I think, depending on, I think her Jupiter's at Antonia's Jupiter's at 1 degree of Gemini. So it's going to be a dramatic change up. I don't have her chart in front of me, but that is huge as it pertains to the projection that goes on in that relationship, both within them as a couple, but also what the outside world will have as a weight of energy that may be picked up by the two of them. Okay, then Venus goes into Cancer, which is Luke Newton's 12th house. And when she goes into Cancer, it's kind of being more isolated again and behind the scenes, softer, that kind of experience, nurturing, kind of like the food makes you feel good, where you feel taken care of at home, those kinds of things. And so that's in May 18th. And but also when Venus is in Cancer, it comes into an opposition of these two. And so that can be a significant time. And somewhere around this time, Jupiter's going into Leo. I need to figure out what date that is. I don't have that out yet. But I think it is around this time that Jupiter goes into Leo. And that changes the dynamic. So he's really going to be even more appearing of the mirror. And then that Jupiter of his sun is facing off with a Pluto in Aquarius. And so that is a confrontation of the self-identity of being famous and the mirror with the other. He is forced to go through a transformation. So that's going to be an interesting period of time for Luke Newton. Then that is June 13th when Venus goes into, which is an interesting date, right? June 13th, because it was June 12th in 2024 when everything just went crazy related to this storyline of Luke Newton with Antonia and the other from that part of his storyline, right? And so June 13th, Venus is in Leo going through his first house. It will amplify him in a relationship, him and his female relationship, female counterparts. This will all kind of come up. So this will be interesting because if he goes through any kind of breakup related to the Uranus coming through the Gemini, back into Gemini with the Venus, there's that kind of moment. Is there an amplification of these other relationships with female counterparts, right? Actual partner or his co-stars, right? So there'll be other moments where this is amplified, but then what he is emergent in his own self-identity will have a confrontation with another. So if his relationship has held on from all of the noise of Bridgerton, there will be another full-on, really hardcore moment of his own stardom taking him up another level perhaps, and it deals with a super confrontation with a required transformation of, and if the partner is not ready for that transformation, it's really like the death of the old identity for a new identity. So if it's Antonia, there could be such a huge transformation going on that there'll be a dose of the collective around the themes of accepting or not accepting, if that's still the case. So she could be amplified up. But if she's moving out, there's something else that's moving in. So there could be that. It is an interesting perspective, because if the relationship managed through all those purification moments and friends, learning from the past friend groups and stumbles of perception there because of his south node being in that 11th house, and when Venus moves through there. But once that Venus moves into, there's like what he needs to be at home when he's away from the public, and what he feels nurtured, how he feels nurtured by the feminine, and what he has experienced with his mother, maybe with his sister in the past, those early relationships, and what he desires as he is continuing to grow as a man. And then where does that put him in this new context? It's like really amped up his self-identity in 2026 because of that move of Jupiter coming into the first house and how it faces off with the Pluto and Aquarius. So big year, right? And it's so interesting that Venus lands into Leo on June 13th, right? Then on July 9th, Venus will then go into his second house. And at that time, I don't know when the transiting nodes will be shifting, but I'm sure at that point they're probably already shifted over into the Leo South Node, North Node in Aquarius. Sometime that shift happens. That will be another video. But that Venus in Virgo is another kind of purification of the Venus when she goes through that process of the Virgo. It's kind of like the humility, that kind of experience. Then she emerges more aligned for relationships. So that Venus moving into Libra August 6th will amplify his siblings, his local community, his communication, maybe more local stage work, these kind of things. But it will again amplify his relationship because Venus is the ruler of that, and he is in an amplified 10th annual profection year. So it's looking at the feminine that's in his 9th house. So when he travels, when he goes, really, I kind of like wonder about all the things he might do related to New York, LA, these hotspots for people who are in front of the public eye so much for creative work. New York and LA are really hotspots. Will he travel in more internationally? I don't know. Italy seems to be a hotspot for him. These could be amplified times of seeing that as well. So when the Venus is in Libra, I would anticipate that kind of kicks up some more international travel. It's August, and if he's not got other creative things that he's working on at that moment, and then he'll be in travel mode. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the relationships that are visible at that time. And then comes September 10th, Venus moves into Scorpio. And that's pretty important because Venus will have a retrograde in the Scorpio sign next fall. So on October 3rd, when Venus is at about 8 degrees, about right there in the chart, it will station retrograde. So this is the Scorpio is a very intense sign. It's going to get into the shadow work of the feminine, and it'll strip away that, and it'll also focus on betrayals, parts of the psyche, those femme fatale kind of imagery, and then it'll move back into Libra. So then it goes back into Libra on October 25th. So October for Luke Newton will be very interesting because he'll be going through this stripping down, not literally, but maybe, you know what? I take that back, because he might have to strip down for something, or he's relating the work that he's doing as literally having some kind of retrograde, like reminding him of having to actually strip down for the Bridgerton stuff. So he might be in a position in his work that puts him in the same place. There he is again having to expose, or the feminine, and he's relating to it in the artwork that he's doing. And there's like that, the whole thing behind the scenes going on, and what that then will come out in the work later that will be visible. So there'll be discussion around that. If that other piece of work, I can't remember the name of it, it's something about, it is about sex education, and it's a movie, I believe. He's gotten the role of Will, who I think was a producer of some videos or something. I can't remember what it was called, but it is like sex education stuff. And if you go look at his IMDb, whatever it is, you can see that it's in pre-production right now. So that means maybe the scripts are being worked on, or I don't know what pre-production actually means. Maybe the, things that are getting ready for them to act and be filmed. So wardrobe, or lack of wardrobe, I guess, whatever goes into pre-production, maybe that is when he's filming, or when they're doing the editing or something, or maybe they're doing part of the, what do you call it, the junket, the press junket for that film. Maybe if it comes out that fast. I don't know how fast a show can be filmed and then produced and then put out. So I don't know how quickly that would be done. But that Venus in Scorpio returns to Libra on October 25th. And so there's a whole nother something to uncover within that context of relationship. What does it have? How does it frame relationship when we're in relationship? So that's important. And then Venus stations direct in that Libra November 13th, and then proceeds to move back through the degrees that she'd already transited, and then back into Scorpio. She goes back into Scorpio on December 4th. So really finishing off the year with Venus in Scorpio. She doesn't emerge into Sagittarius until January 7th of 2027, right after, basically a day after the Chiron in Aries goes direct at 26 of Aries. So we're still got that interesting Chiron in Aries as a part of the mix. And then finally on February 3rd, just 2 days before his birthday in 2027, Venus returns into into Capricorn, the sign that she started off 2026 with. So there's this kind of a whole loop of experiences. Venus goes around the zodiac, and how it will play out for Luke Newton. Definitely a big, huge, and of course, so much of his focus of his art is got that component with Venus in the dancing, the dancer, both with how he portrayed Colin Bridgerton with Penelope and that whole storyline with the dancing scenes, and also with him actually in a relationship with a dancer. This is a part of the mix. It is archetypally so, but there is so much more going on with the purification part of this, and him pulling off new layers of the psyche in his acting gigs through either psychological thriller, and how that is interplayed with a co-lead, him being a co-lead in a group ensemble again, and then being pulled off the lead, but people have a huge projection that needs to be worked through as a part of what's anticipated, what they expect, what they'd like to see, what they want, demand more of. And then there's like, we got to check in with self about, okay, what are you wanting from that, and what is that igniting in you? Because this is art is always about what is you as the beholder of the art getting. What are you getting in that connection, right? Self-reflection. Anyway, to finalize this, I wanted to just look at a couple of things. What else did I have to do on? So we covered Venus. We covered a little bit of his solar return. Is there anything in the solar return else I want to cover? There's a huge aspect of Venus and her purification with the Neptune and the Saturn, how that's emphasized in his career, his public persona, his relationship, also all of the energy from Pluto opposing him, and then when Jupiter goes into Leo. So there's so many things happening for Luke Newton in 2026 and clear through the whole year. 2027, we'll look at that further down the line. but it's really important to keep in mind time of everything. Now, I remember 24. So we'll be coming up on it, I think in 27-ish. 26, 27. What I had made a comment on earlier, much earlier in my video work on Luke Newton, was that the progressed planet Venus goes retrograde in his chart. There's in his progressed chart. So Venus by progression will go retrograde. And it was, I think it's 27, 28. So there's a huge shift in the career. I'll focus on that in another video, but that is also emerging. So he goes through this purification of the Venus and the whole change up and the facing off of the self-identity, going through a shift with self and other. And these are all the stage of 2026. Huge stuff. I anticipate if he's tracking well through what he's working on, good agent, whatever, and he locks in stuff in 2026, it will feed him for many years to come, because of what will emerge in the following year when he's in an 11th house and a profection that brings in the Mercury next to his Saturn. So that has longevity connected to it. So whatever he does in 2027 has a huge longevity potential for him of bringing something from the past into that moment in 2027, and how that can have a huge lasting effect on him in his career for a very, very long time, beyond what is coming Bridgerton. Yeah. So if there's another big film that kind of brings him forward, and that's there as well. But also how is important with the other because of that seventh house perspective. He has such a strong mirroring principle within his chart. Okay. What else? Lastly here, I want to point out, this is looking at it from just the solar turn itself, just to see the splay of the planets. Again, this ascendant is probably not accurate, but again, it could be deeper into the Leo, or it could even be up a little bit in the, but I do believe it is in Leo, because I really think there's a huge face-off moment of purification for his own self-identity that's going to happen with the other. So this will be a big year, but also a tricky one for navigating certain things about his own identification with partner, co-leads, and how he may start controlling his narrative even more than he already has, because of what is going to be happening in 2026 and leading into 2027. So that's all up again. Because I think what could happen is there's a repeating theme of this huge amount of energy, but because now Antonia has been brought out already from the award shows that she's been present at, now coming with him through as a partner that he has acknowledged now way more publicly, there is a whole transformation that's going on with relating to that, because he didn't do that pre-24. He really didn't have her out front. She was more in the background. Now she's going to be more out front. And there's some kind of collective response to that that's important for our own purification and understanding this, okay? Because we're observing Luke Newton, so there's an observation point of perspective, and then understanding self and other, that we may get the feedback from that, okay? Important, very important for collective healing. And then that is what I think about just seeing the chart by itself and the emphasis of that seventh house partner, and that it's really going to be. But the thing is Luke Newton is so interesting because that heavy mirroring context, but really it's the transformation over a significant amount of time. What can emerge for Luke Newton and what we observe with him with these other chapters with Jupiter opposite Pluto is going to be huge. And then what that spills out in his own self-identity and how he identifies himself related to other. There could be a complete death and rebirth of whatever's going on with him and other that manifests in some way. So each of the persons that he's been connected with is a really important part of that process for him, and his own evolution of self and how he looks at that. But it's going to start getting to the point where he fixes on it more, and it manifests because his Mercury has been projected. He might be that it's been projected, the Mercury's been projected onto the other person. But then there's like a pullback of identifying, oh, that thing within that other person is me. That thing that I projected onto that female is me, or a part of myself that I've not accepted as part of me, right? Like these are the components for Luke Newton. So hopefully that's all helpful in understanding that. I'm losing my light, so I'm getting dark on here. Okay, so the last thing I covered in the beginning was the beginning of the year, January 1st, 2026, and where Venus is. And of course, she goes back into Capricorn in January of 2027. So we kind of went through the whole cycle of the Venus. So hopefully this has been a video helpful on Luke Newton, helpful on some insights about what he is going to be going through, and also helpful on the transit of Venus and understanding that connection to when you're having an annual profection, whatever year you are. It tells me what house is in focus and what planet is the ruler of that house in your own chart. And that gives you the ability to kind of track the things. So your notebook will be super helpful this year, and you can, draw out Luke Newton's chart. And I don't know if I have a simple one of Luke's chart alone, but that inner wheel is the one in the green is the one that you can make in your notebook and follow along, make notes of when Venus is in each of those signs over the year, over what I discussed. You can make a little map of that, and that can be a long-term homework, right? Like each time I do a video, you're going to learn something more. This is a very strong year to discover and uncover new insights about Venus, new insights about public reputation, which is 10th house, and how it is for, the Venus in Aries getting this amplification of purified fire energy from the Saturn, which can be a trial, a challenging thing that must be experienced. And then the Neptune, which is you must surrender into it. This is a part of the path for whatever you're going to be able to show up and be as you emerge, as you walk forward, as things move on. And so that's important for Luke Newton and his growth. And I think in your reflection, you may find some things for yourself. So as you're reflecting on him, you may have things like, oh, I'm curious about this and that. And oh, this is how I've thought about this archetype. Okay. So for me in Luke Newton, my thought on his archetype he is like the mirror with the beloved. So Luke Newton for me is, when I see Luke Newton, he is a big reminder about our experience collectively or individually about how we have perceived the lover and beloved and pursuing that which you desire, because he pursues that which he desires. And that's a Venus in Aries pursuit. He's not sitting on the couch waiting for her to come. No, he pursues, right? But you may also see in his feminine projection, the feminine, the woman in his experience, either the co-lead or even his actual partner, girlfriend, whatever you want to call her, is a fiery masculine, not masculine physically, but a woman who goes and gets things for herself and might struggle with the principle of her power of magnetism, right? There is something about realizing there is a purpose for having the feminine have the power to go get and be independent. That's that Aries. And there's something super attractive about that, by the way. So there's no bad planet, right? Like we project that onto the planets. It's not, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, this is just reflecting back. It has a principle that's important for the soul to get in their experience, life experience about, and bring aware to themselves about who they are, right? And who anyone is a beautiful thing. So I hope this has been fun. I hope this has been informative. And I hope that I can't wait to read all of your answers on the archetype you brought to or bringing from your experience and observing of Luke Newton. He's an interesting actor, and I am really interested to see other parts that he gets over the next few years, and really wonder about how he will navigate such a big year, and he absolutely must have that public persona out front come February, and moving through all of the things that's going to bring into his awareness and his growth and all of those aspects, and being confronted with the mirror and the demand of the demand of Pluto in Aquarius for his relationship with it all and the collective, because Pluto in Aquarius is very much like the information of the collective and that knowledge that comes out of it, but it's the mirror. It's so powerful. That's why Luke Newton is so interesting, I think. Nicola has her own, and I'll do a video on Nicola soon, but definitely Luke Newton, fascinating, right? All right, I don't know if I have anything else, and so I want to stop sharing, and I want to say thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of your week, and there will be information soon about the community, because I can do more in a community that might get flagged on YouTube. So I hope you will join me there, and maybe we'll do something spicy and fun inside when I get that opened up for probably first 2 weeks of December. I'll try to do something fun because I'm going to be traveling in December, going back towards my home, which is going to be my new home city, which is Portland, Oregon. And but then I'm going to go travel to Honolulu to go see my daughter. So I am going to be all over the place in December. I'm traveling so much, and then I'll settle down because I'll be in Dublin, as far as I know, with everything planned. We are planning to be in Dublin, I think, by January 5th. So the second half of December, I will be limited in what I can do in videos that have to be recorded and then edited, but I can do maybe a live or two at the end of December.